There is a particular shame in being rejected by your own mate, and I had learned to carry it the way I carried the bread, early, in the dark, before anyone was awake to watch. I had 25 winters and a place at the lowest bench of the keep's kitchens, which is a generous way of saying I had nowhere else to go. 2 years passed. The wolf I had been promised to looked at me across a moot fire, felt whatever an alpha feels, and said the words that sever a bond before it has fairly begun. Rejected. The word does its own work, I do not need to dress it. I left my home pack with what I could carry, and walked until a kind cook at the Iron Keep took pity on a girl who could bake, and there I had stayed, useful and unseen, which after a public unchoosing is the most a woman can hope for. So I knew something about silence before I ever met the boy who had stopped speaking. Everyone in the keep knew about the prince. Bram, the king's only son, 6 winters old, who had not said a single word in the 2 years since the Luna died. They had brought him healers from 3 territories. They had brought elders who burned herbs and elders who muttered over his small wrists. They had brought a man from the southern coast who claimed he could draw speech from stones, and the prince had looked at him with an expression I can only call patient, and said nothing, and the man had left richer and useless. I saw the boy most mornings. He had taken to sitting in the kitchen doorway, where the ovens kept the cold off, knees up, watching the work with eyes that everyone called empty, and that I never once thought were empty. I have seen empty eyes. I wore them myself for the better part of a year. The prince's eyes were not empty. They were watching. There is a difference, and I knew it because I had learned the difference from the inside. I did not try to make him talk. I want that understood, because of what people said afterward. I did not crouch down with a healer's voice and coax. Everyone had coaxed. Coaxing was the whole problem, though it took me a while to see it. I just let him watch me bake, and I talked to the bread, the way my mother had, because dough is better company than most people, and asks nothing back. The morning it happened was an ordinary one, which is how these things go. I was setting the loaves to prove on the warm shelf above the ovens, and the prince was in his doorway, and the kitchen cat, a battered orange creature with one ear, had come to sit by his knee the way it did. And I noticed, because noticing is the only skill rejection ever gave me, that the boy's mouth moved. Just slightly. He was saying something to the cat. No sound, but his lips made a shape, the same shape, twice, and the cat leaned into his hand. He could shape words. He was choosing not to spend them on us. I felt that land in me like a key turning. So I did not coax. I crouched down at the prince's level, not too close, the way you do with a creature that has been grabbed at too many times. And I did not ask him to speak. And I did not tell him I knew he could. I looked at the loaves proving on the shelf, and I told him the truth as I understood it. They won't rise if we watch them, I said. The dough. It's shy. It does its best growing when no one's staring at it waiting. So I turn around. I turned my back on the bread, there in the doorway, and looked out at the grey yard instead. Everybody in this keep is staring at the bread, little prince, day and night, waiting for it to rise. I think the bread is tired of being watched. I think it would rise just fine if everybody would turn around and let it be brave on its own. For a moment there was only the fire and the cat's rough purr. Then a voice I had never heard, small and rusty as a hinge after rain, said, "You turned around." 3 words, after 2 years. I did not gasp, and I did not weep, and I did not make it about me, though every part of me wanted to. I kept looking at the yard. I did, I said. I'm good at it. I've had practice not looking at things that hurt. Will it rise now? It always was going to, I said. It was just waiting for the room to stop holding its breath. And that was when I felt the change in the air at the far end of the kitchen, the particular weight a room takes on when the most powerful wolf alive walks into it. And I turned my head and saw the king of the Iron Territories standing in the inner doorway. Gone the colour of ash, staring at his son as though the boy had returned from the dead. Which, in a way I did not yet understand. He had, so had his father. They had both been gone 2 years. No one had thought to count the king among the silent. His name was Roderick, and I had seen him perhaps 4 times in 2 years, always at a distance, always armoured in the particular stillness I now recognised, because I had just watched its smaller copy speak about bread. He crossed the kitchen slowly, as if the floor might give. He went down on one knee, in front of his son, a king, on the flagstones, in front of the scullery staff, and he opened his mouth, and the most powerful man alive could not find a single word to say to the boy who had just found his. Bram looked at his father, and said nothing more. The court would later tell the story, as the kitchen Omega worked a miracle, and the prince spoke to her. They left out that the prince spoke to me and went silent again the instant his father knelt. They left it out because it did not flatter anyone. But I saw it, and it told me the whole shape of the thing. The boy had words. He simply did not have them for the man who shared his grief, and had never once said so. Roderick rose. He looked at me for the first time, and I had braced for a king's distance, and got instead a drowning man's desperation poorly hidden behind it. How? He said. Just that. I didn't do anything, I told him, which was true and useless. I stopped waiting for him, that's all. Everyone in this keep has spent 2 years waiting for that child to be all right. He can feel it like weather. So can I. I should have stopped there. I am bad at stopping there. You can feel it too, Your Majesty. That's why he won't speak to you. You're waiting harder than anyone. I had, in the space of a morning, ended 2 years of royal silence, and insulted the king to his face in front of his staff. The cook to my left made a sound like a kettle. Roderick did not have me removed. He looked at me a long moment, the way you look at a window that has just shown you your own house on fire, and then he picked up his silent son with a tenderness that did not match the rest of him, and he carried the boy out, and he said, over his shoulder, in a voice gone rough, "Come tomorrow." To the prince's rooms. The kitchens can spare you. The kitchens could not spare me, as it happened, but you do not say that to a king. I came the next day, and the day after, and a pattern built itself the way patterns do. I did not teach the prince to speak. I baked in the small hearth kitchen off his rooms. The king had it opened for me, which set the whole keep whispering. And I let Bram watch, and I talked to the bread, and sometimes the bread talked back through a 6-year-old boy, who had decided I was safe to spend words on. Small words at first, more flour, the cat is hungry, that one's burnt. Then, slowly, larger ones. He never spoke when his father was in the room. I noticed. I think Roderick noticed too, and I think it cut him in a place that did not show, and I would be lying if I told you the only one I was learning to read was the boy. The king began to find reasons to be in the doorway. They were poor reasons. He inspected the hearth. He asked, with great gravity, about flour. He stood 3 paces inside the room, when 1 pace would have done, and watched his son not speak, and watched me pretend not to notice him watching. And the distance he kept was its own kind of language. He was a man who had decided, somewhere in the last 2 years, that he was not allowed to want things, and was discovering in real time that the rule did not cover everything. One evening he stayed after Bram had fallen asleep over the flower, and I expected him to leave with the boy, and he did not. "You talk to it," he said. "The bread, the way you would talk to a person. It listens better than most people do." I did not look up from the dough, and it has never once told me I would be all right when I was not. Is that what you think I do? It was not quite a question. I think you are a man who has been told he must be made of iron for so long that he has forgotten the iron was put on him. It is not what you are made of underneath. I set the dough to rest and finally met his eyes across the small warm room. You can put it down in here, you know. No one keeps count in a kitchen. He looked at me the way a man looks at a door he had spent 2 years assuming was a wall. Then he reached, almost, for the dish of proving dough on the shelf between us, to give his hands something to do, the way he was forever setting cups down too carefully, and he stopped, his hand a breath from it, and drew back. "It is shy," he said. "You told my son. It will not rise if I touch it. It will not rise if you watch it like that," I told him. "Touching is allowed." Touching is the whole point, eventually. I had meant the bread. I am fairly sure we both knew I had not entirely meant the bread. The fire was very loud. He kept his 3 paces, and I kept my side of the table, and neither of us closed the distance, because closing it would have meant admitting we had each, separately, begun to want to, and we were both of us 2 years out of practice at wanting anything at all. He left without the boy that night, and I stayed in the warm kitchen a long while after, working dough that did not need it, and I understood that I was in a great deal more trouble than a rejected Omega can afford. It would have gone somewhere gentler, sooner, if Lady Hedda had not been the late Luna's sister. She came to the prince's rooms on the 4th day, and she was lovely in the cold way of a knife laid out on velvet, and she had been, I learned, the boy's near constant guardian since her sister died, the one who had brought the healers and the elders and the stone charmer, the one who had spent 2 years failing to reach Bram and being praised for the trying. She looked at me, kneading dough in her dead sister's son's rooms, and I watched 2 years of being the devoted aunt curdle into something else behind her eyes. "A rejected Omega," she said, to no one, to the room. Unchosen by her own pack, and now playing nursemaid to the heir of the Iron Territories. I'm sure the court will find that very reassuring. She crouched to Bram's level, too close, the grabbed at too many times distance, and put on a voice like sugar over a blade. "You'll tell your aunt good morning, won't you, darling? You'll speak for me." Bram looked at her with his patient, present, not empty eyes, and said nothing, and I watched her understand that the boy had a voice now, and was choosing, deliberately, not to spend it on her. She stood. She smoothed her skirts, and when she left she took the warmth of the room with her, and I knew, the way prey knows, that I had just made an enemy who outranked me in every way a person can be outranked. If you are still with me, stay close, because what I found out next changed the whole story I thought I was standing in. And if a kitchen girl outranked in every possible way is the sort of thing you find yourself rooting for, this channel is full of them. Subscribe and stay a while. That is all the asking I will do. Now, the thing I found out. I found it out because I cannot leave a hurt thing alone, which is either my best quality or my worst, depending on the day. A week in, I went looking for the king at an hour I should not have, because Bram had said something that afternoon that would not leave me. I had asked him, lightly, turning the loaves, whether he missed his mother, and the boy had said, in his small rusty voice, "Everyone says she's sleeping. Or resting, or at peace, a pause. Nobody will say she's dead." So I decided I wouldn't say anything either. If they get to lie, I get to be quiet. A 6-year-old had looked at a keep full of grown wolves lying to him out of love and had gone on strike. He was not broken. He was the only honest creature in the building, and he had been waiting 2 years for one adult to stop lying long enough to deserve his words. I found the king in the old solar that no one used, and I understood the rest of it in one look. There was a portrait there. Turned to the wall, there was a chair pulled up to face the turned-around painting, and the dust told me he sat in it often, in the dark, looking at the back of a picture he could not bear to see and could not bear to move. "You haven't said her name," I said from the doorway. "In 2 years. Have you?" "Maeve, you haven't said it once." He went very still. "How do you? Because your son hasn't either, and children learn silence from somewhere. I came in, though I had no right. He's not broken, Your Majesty. He's furious. Everyone's been lying to him. She's resting. She's at peace. And he decided if the grown wolves get to lie, he gets to say nothing at all. He's been waiting 2 years for someone to tell him the true thing, and he won't take it from me. He's been waiting for you. The one person in this keep who is exactly as silent as he is." The King of the Iron Territories put his face in his hands. There, in the dark, in the chair before the turned painting, and the strongest wolf alive shook like a struck thing, and I did the only useful thing I have ever known how to do. I crossed the room and I stood beside the chair, close enough that he would know I was there, and I did not coax, and I did not lie, and I let him not be all right in front of one person for the first time in 2 years. I couldn't say it, he managed. If I said her name out loud, it was true. As long as the keep called it resting, some part of me, he stopped. I taught my son to do that. I taught him to swallow it. I have been so afraid of my own grief that I let my child go silent rather than show him how to grieve, and a kitchen girl saw it in a morning. A kitchen girl who's been rejected and unchosen and lied to her whole life, I said. I know swallowed grief the way you know swords. It's not a gift I wanted. But it's the one I have. He looked up at me then, and the distance he had kept for 2 years was simply not there anymore, and neither of us said the thing that was suddenly, terrifyingly in the room with us. Because the timing was wrong, and the grief was too new, and we were both in our different ways out of practice at wanting to be alive. "Come tomorrow," he said again. The same words as the kitchen. They meant something different now. I did not get to come tomorrow. Lady Hedda saw to that. She had not spent 2 years building herself into the prince's guardian to watch a rejected Omega and a thawing king undo it in a fortnight. She moved the way careful, frightened people move, fast, and cloaked in concern. By the next evening there was a writ, as the boy's nearest blood on his mother's side, and given the king's well-documented incapacity in matters of the prince these 2 years, Lady Hedda petitioned the council for formal guardianship of Bram, and, while the matter was weighed, for the immediate removal from the keep of the unsuitable influence, the rejected Omega, whose presence in the heir's rooms was, she said, a scandal that put the succession itself in question. They came for me at dusk. Hedda had timed it well. The king was 3 days' ride away, gone to settle a border dispute he could not refuse, exactly the gap a careful woman waits for. They did not let me say goodbye to the boy. They put me out the keep's low gate with my one bag, into the front edge of a winter storm, and the captain who did it would not meet my eyes, and I understood that I had been unchosen and cast out for the second time in my life, and that this time I had a great deal more to lose. I got as far as the village below the keep before I stopped walking, because I knew what would happen. I knew exactly what would happen, the way you know a dropped cup will break. Bram would wake to find me gone, like his mother, like everyone, vanished without the true words spoken. And he would do the only thing he knew how to do with a grief no one would name. He would go silent again, maybe for good this time. I stood in the snow with the wind coming up, and I thought about how sensible it would be to keep walking. I had been rejected by this keep. I owed it nothing. A wise woman walks. I turned around and went back up the hill into the storm. The cold drove into me the way old magic drives into bone. Not a discomfort, but a weight, a thing with intent, pushing into every place I was tired. By the time I reached the low gate, my hands had stopped being hands. The captain was gone from it. One frightened boy of a guard remained, and he took one look at a woman half frozen and on purpose returned, and he let me through, because some people are decent when the powerful are not watching. I did not go to the prince's rooms. That was the thing I understood in the snow. The boy was not waiting for me. I went to the old solar, where a king had just come home 3 days early to find his son's chosen healer cast out, and his late wife's sister holding a guardianship writ, and where he sat now in the dark, before the turned painting, frozen again, more dangerous and more lost than I had ever seen him, a man 1 wrong hour from letting the grief win for good. I stood in the doorway, dripping melt onto his floor. "She lied to a council to take your son," I said, through teeth that would not hold still, "and she put me out in a storm. And none of that is why I came back up this hill. I came back because your boy is going to wake up tomorrow and find another person gone with no true word said, and he is going to go quiet again. And this time you will not get him back unless you do the one thing none of us can do for you." I made myself cross the room. I put my frozen hand over his, where it gripped the arm of the chair. "Go to your son. Stop waiting for him to be all right. Be not all right with him. Say her name to his face. He has been waiting 2 years to hear you say it. He doesn't need a healer. He needs his father to stop turning the painting to the wall." For a long moment the king did not move, and I felt the grief in the room try to close back over both of us, cold as the storm, 2 years of held silence fighting to keep its grip. Then Roderick stood, and turned, and walked out of that solar toward his son's rooms, and I followed, because I had carried the words this far, and I would see them land. Bram was awake. Children always are, on the nights that matter. The king knelt by his son's bed, and for the first time in 2 years he did not arrange his face into strength, and he let the boy see all of it, and he said, in a voice that broke clean in the middle and kept going anyway, "Your mother is dead, Bram, not resting, not sleeping. Maeve is dead, and I have missed her every single day, and I was so afraid of how much it hurt that I never told you, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. You have not been alone in being quiet. I have been quiet right beside you. I just did it where you couldn't see." The boy looked at his father, the present, watching, not empty eyes, and his small face crumpled the way a child's does when it is finally, blessedly allowed to. "I knew," Bram said. "I knew she was dead. I just wanted somebody to say it." And then, in the smallest voice in the world, can we say it together? I don't want to be the only one. So they said it together, the king and the silent prince, the true word neither had been able to carry alone, and I stood in the doorway with snowmelt in my boots and did not make a sound. Because some rooms you are only meant to witness. Lady Hedda's writ did not survive the morning. She had built her claim on the king's incapacity with the prince, and the king walked into the council at dawn with his son's hand in his and his son's voice in the room. And Bram, who would not speak for the aunt who had grabbed at him, looked up at the assembled lords and said, clear and small, she put my friend out in the snow. So nobody would say the true thing. I don't want her. I want the bread lady. A pause, and then the line that undid the whole council, because a child does not know which truths are too large to say. My father said Mamma's name. He couldn't do it until the bread lady came back up the hill. A guardianship petition built on a king's failure does not survive the king's 6-year-old explaining, in open council, exactly who failed him and who did not. Hedda had overreached the way frightened people do. She was stripped of her guardian's standing, and when it came out that she had falsified a council writ and cast a woman into a storm to do it, she was given the choice between a quiet life on a far western estate and a less quiet trial. She took the estate. She did not say goodbye to the boy either. He did not seem to mind. The court wanted to make me a miracle. I declined. I had not worked a miracle. I had turned my back on some bread and told a frightened keep to stop holding its breath, and the rest had been theirs to do. The fracture was real, of course. A king who takes a rejected Omega as his Luna over the noble matches his council had lined up for the succession. That is a thing wolves test. Some tested it. He did not lose, and after the third one stopped trying, the keep settled into its new shape the way bread settles, slowly, and then all at once. He asked me properly in the end, not in the kitchen and not in the solar, but in the prince's hearthroom, with flour on the table between us and a 6-year-old chaperone pretending to be asleep in the corner and failing. I have nothing graceful to offer you, Roderick said. I am a man who was frozen for 2 years, and a father who failed his son, and a king whose court will whisper about you. But my son chose you out of a whole keep, and his wolf is never wrong, and somewhere in the last month I stopped being able to imagine a table without you at it. He turned a fistful of flour over in his hand, the way he had once turned a question about proving loaves. This enormous grieving man trying to court a kitchen girl, and missing every graceful word, and landing the true ones anyway. Stay, not as a healer. As the one I turn around for. When he kissed me, it was not a thing I could take apart into pieces. It was 2 years of swallowed grief, and a storm survived, and a child's voice in the next room, all of it coming undone at once. And what broke open in me was the plain astonishment of being chosen, out loud, in daylight, by someone who knew exactly what I was and wanted me anyway. From the corner, a small voice that was supposed to be asleep said, finally, with great disgust, and we laughed, all 3 of us, in a keep that had forgotten how. A year on, the prince does not stop talking. I say this with my whole heart and a faint ringing in my ears. Bram talks to the cat, to the guards, to the bread, to the visiting lords who do not know what to do with a small boy who asks them direct questions about death over supper. We let him. We decided, his father and I, that this house would never again ask a child to swallow a true thing to make the grown wolves comfortable. Maeve's painting hangs in the great hall now, turned to face the room. Bram talks to her too, sometimes, in passing, the easy way you talk to someone who is part of the house. The king no longer flinches when her name is said. He says it himself, to his son, in the warm, ordinary tone you use for someone you have finally finished being too afraid to miss. And the bread rises. It always was going to. There is a long table in the great hall now, where the lowest bench kitchen girl sits at the head beside a king, and there is always bread on it, and no one in this keep holds their breath any more, waiting for anything to be all right. We just turn around and let the good things be brave on their own, and they are. So tell me, did you see it, that the boy was never broken? Only waiting, and that his father was just as quiet and no one thought to count him? Or did it sneak up on you the way it snuck up on me? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you are listening from tonight, because I like to picture you all out there in the dark with something warm in your hands. If this one rose in you, stay with me, subscribe, and I'll bake you another. There is always another. No keep stays quiet forever. Not once someone finally turns around. Until then, say the true thing, even when it is hard. Especially then.